Kunchish, Stikachjuhan, Kunaksehat Kaudia. Thank you, all of you, those of wherever you have come from. Tsu Yukeyuch Sitini, Tsu Wushkanach Watuda Yad Tunach, Zoom Tunach. Thank you, all of you. It's good to see all of you. It's good that we're gathering together through Zoom, through this thing again. Tsu Stikachjuhan, Chitlakach Tuuk Enuch, Adusatu Tuau Siku. Lingit Katangi. It always makes me feel good for anyone that wants to learn or learn more about the Tlingit language. Achaya Kuntishiye Dayachaka. This is why I'm saying thank you to all of you that are here today. Um, you you last week adayeju to ne we vowels sounds. The other week, the when we were talking, we were working on vowels and sounds. Uh, if you have any questions at the moment, if you'd like to ask you right now, that's more than fine. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask. And I apologize for Monday. I had some car problems, so I had to take it in at noon. That was the only day that was available, or the only time available, so I had to take my car in. So I apologize for that. Anybody have any questions? Lost my pen. Okay. Let's see. The other day, I also remember too that somebody had asked about greetings and departures, and there's really many different ways of doing it. Let's see if they're related to you. Let's see. So I remember I don't think I touched upon this very much, but names are very important, and names go with houses. Each house had names that came with it, and that's the way I understand it. Um, your name meant a lot to people, and those, especially the old timers, that really knew the names of people. Um, these are very important, very important. Um, let's see. So if give an example. I was reading a story the other day, and it was a fisherman. They went up fishing up north, and when they went up there, they went to go visit somebody. And when they went to visit, they knocked on the door and they asked them, who's this? They didn't know who it was, and they asked them, and Tlingit told them. They told them their Tlingit name. And that man that answered the door got teary-eyed. He got emotional, and he said, "My grandfather has come to visit me." So sometimes we hear our grandparents' names, and they mean so much to us. Our names mean so much in our culture that it's just like seeing our grandpa or grandmother again when we hear these names. We're reminded of those people. So I know it's so important. We're named after either our grandmother, our grandfather, auntie, or uncle. And I was named after my grandfather. So uh, when I was born, Achlil did Khun Andrew Janich, Achantu a good Adachawe Aksha to a Chuste out Lichuch, Akawe Achistuin Yau Seka, Aha, Kijanai, Kanach Kuchwidi Goti Ish. So when I was born, my grandfather, Andrew Johnny, came to the hospital. He came to visit us, and he rubbed me from my head to my toe. Just touched my head, my arms, my legs, all the way down to my feet, and he held my feet like that. And he looked at my dad and he said, "Uh-huh, he's really back. Your father is really back." And he's the one that gave me my Tlingit name when I was born. Tlingit Khasati. This is the way we are as Tlingit people when we're born. We're given names when we were born, and they were from our mothers or some our father's side as well. And the grandmothers were the ones that would give the names, is what I've heard as well. And each region it's different. Um, if I remember correctly, John E.C. Jackson said that when we were born with two names, one from our mother's side and one from our father's, and thus we were born with two names. And then you earn names after that. You got to earn them by doing things for the people. That's how you get names, and you pay for them at a payoff party. I remember the beginning, one of the first classes, I had told everyone that Cecilia Coons, she said, when we talk, the only time we can talk about ourselves, it's at a payoff party because we're putting up money. We're putting money up to talk about ourselves. And so at the party, you're doing that as well. You're paying for a name if you've done a lot of things for the people or for the clan. That's what you do. So that's the way I understand it. You work for your names, and even the amount of buttons that you have on your button blanket also are a significance of how much you've done. I remember my auntie Nora talking about her button blanket one time, and she had two rows of buttons on there, and I can't remember how it came up, but she said I earned my rows on the button blanket. So they all everything in our culture means something. It's not just because we liked it. It had meaning. It had meaning to it. So just like the rose on a button blanket, the amount of rings that was on somebody's on a hat, even the rows of ermine on a shakiyat, and there was reasons why they used the ermine when it was white. Uh, there's always a meaning and a reason why our people did things, not just in Tlingit, you'd say "Hethachukei," not just any old way. So that's something to keep in mind. Like I said, I'll try and teach some cultural things if you have any questions about it, or if I'm reminded of something that we've talked about, I'll try and explain it. So that's the thing about names. Names are Their dad was Nechadi from down in the Ketchikan Saxman area. You can. So uh, when we hear these names, we're reminded of our grandparents, our uncles, our aunties, whoever, like that story I had told you that somebody came to visit me, and that's how our people felt very strongly about our names. They felt as if because we believed that they were reincarnated through our names. Um, so that's why our people would get emotional when they'd heard these names. I remember when I experienced from my own is at my grandmother's payoff party. I led my brothers and I led that party, and I received a name from my father's side, and I have some relatives that they knew the person, I believe, or like I said, this is how strongly our people feel about some of these our old traditions, or not traditions, but our way of life. When I received the name Yandu Ain, that's my father's side. Comes from my father's side. Um, Kausa up in Yakutat, his Tlingit name is Kausa or Kusan. He his father's name was Yandu Ain, and when I received that name, my auntie that was there, she couldn't help herself and got emotional. And she came up and she gave me a big hug and she said, "My grandfather, I always wanted to meet my grandfather." And she cried and she just gave me the big hug. So that's how important our names are to us. Very important. Like I said again, these names go with houses. Um, my Auntie Nora in celebration 86 or 88, it's on the YouTube, the Mark's Trail Sun Dancers. She was talking about all the family names and the ones that came from Yakutat. Because my grandmother's from the Yakutat side, Kunahu Kwan. My grandmother's Kunahu Kwan. She was, their house was from Alsac, and she gave some of my cousins and my nieces and nephews names from Yakutat. And when she was explaining them, she said that he's from Yakutat, his name's from Yakutat, or my uncle Leo, his Clinton name is Akeish, and she said that his name and my father Kinkadunik. She said that their names are from Haynes. They're from Haynes. They're from Raven House. So names go with these houses, and that's how she explained it back in the 80s, late 80s. So, is there any questions about these names? How, like any further explanation, or does that help? Okay. So, sometimes even our people go as far as addressing you as their grandmother or uncle, even as kids. I have another grandmother that I talk to quite a bit in Tlingit here. And one of the teachers from Sitka when she was in high school would call her grandma, and she didn't understand why until finally one day she asked him, says, "How come you call me grandma?" She said, "You're way older than me." He said, "It's because you carry my grandmother's name. That's why I call you grandma." And so that's how our people view these names. When we hear them, if our grandmother had that name, we sometimes call them grandma, or we call them auntie or uncle or grandpa. However, the relation is to you through that name, as our people would address them as that. Just because we are respected and we respected our grandparents or whoever the relation was, we respected them that much that we called them that, and we believe that they came back. So we talked about greetings. There's different ways of asking how are you in Tlingit. Um, so the most common one that we hear is wasa iati. We can all try and say that. Wasa iati. Wasa iati. How are you? And this is more of a physical emphasis, like your physical being. How are you physically? Another way that's often said that is wasas iati. Wasas iati. Both mean the same exact thing. They're both implying the same thing. It's for both. The names are for both. So if your grandmother or grandfather name was given to somebody, even somebody you didn't know, and you heard that name, like I said, these like that fisherman that went up north, went up to Yakutat. I was reading. He went up to Yakutat, knocked on somebody's door, and he told them who he was, and that man got teary-eyed and said, "My grandfather has come to visit me." So that can go for a male or a female because of these names are so powerful. They're so strong. They mean that much to us. A lot of names are really difficult to translate. They're really difficult to translate. We can kind of get the gist of some of them, but even then, if we don't know the story, because most names are documenting historical things, they're documenting a history or something that had happened within the clan or that house. So I know there's a lot of raven names that are shared, um, even on the eagle side. I know my clan shares names with Tsagwedi, some Tekwedi, Wushkitan, some are shared with Chukanedi. And that just shows that we were all one clan at one point, and all the Raven clans share Raven names as well. Some from the creation stories or when their clans were one at one point, like the name. I don't know which clan it is down in Ketchikan, but I heard it came from the Ketchikan area. Base Teen that's shared with the Kohos up here. So names are sometimes shared because that just shows that we were all one clan at one point, either on the Raven side or the Eagle side. So when we're asking with physical emphasis on how are you doing, wasasiyati or wasaiyati, slight difference, but when you hear it spoken, it's you'll catch it, or you'll get used to it, or you'll just used to be hearing it. But both mean the same thing. Both are referring to how are you physically. So this is with physical emphasis. And if you want to ask more about emotions, like how are they emotionally, that would be wasa ituati. Wasa ituati. So tu is referring to your inner being, your inner feelings, um, it can change on the word, but in this case, it's referring to your inner being. How are you emotionally? How are you know asking that your inner being? How is that your inner being doing? And if you notice, instead of the yati, it turned to wati. This changes with dialect as well. Um, let's see. So in ceremonial context, someone might say, "Achyetche," my children. I've heard all the other speakers also say, "Achwatche." They changed it to a W sound. So it's just dialect difference, but both mean the same thing. I also just like the Kagwantan women from up in Klukwan area. We call them the Yanwasha or Wanwasha. Wanwa is the word for Navy in Tlingit. So they were called the women of the Navy, is what it translates to, because when our women and our men chased the sailors down towards Groundhog Bay, they killed off the Navy men. We heard this from Ed Kuhn Sr. He's the one that told the story for Jenny Clanat, Shag Sani Keek. He told the story for her. And to put things into more perspective, Jenny Clanat, the weaver, she was 13 years old when the 1904 potlatch happened in Sitka. So she was there when that story was told in public. And if she felt that it was as if that story was told wrong in any way, like any of our elders would, they would correct you at the party, say this is wrong here, and I'm going to correct it. So if she felt that as if it was told wrong, she would have corrected it. But she asked him to tell the story, and so that's where we got the name Yanwa Shah or Wanwa Shah. Both mean the same thing. It's just a dialect difference, only changing the Y to a W sound. So and then in responses, for a response, you could say Helwa Sechat Ute, Helwa Sechat Ute. Which means Helwasa means nothing's wrong. So it's like you're saying, I'm fine, I'm okay. So my grandmother up in Anchorage, when I was in high school for my freshman year, sophomore year, she said, Helwasa means nothing's wrong. That's how she translated it. So that's one way of responding to it. Helwasa khat ute, Helwasa ute. Another one is, oops. So remember when I said the way you say things can you add your own emotion to the word that'll tell you how they're really feeling. So if I ask somebody, "Wasiyati, how are you doing, Grandma or Grandpa?" I remember sometimes they would say "Khatyak eh." You hear how I changed my voice changed in that one. That's just adding that it's like saying I feel really good. So I added my own emotion to it to tell you how good of a feeling I'm feeling. Any questions? Okay. Another one you'll hear them say is chushugu. 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 Which means still the same. I'm still good, or I'm still the same. And I remember, let's see, who was I talking to? Can't remember which elder I was talking to. But anyways, they asked how I was doing, and I responded with that. And he said he said, just be careful when you say that because it sounds like you're bragging when you get older. And so remember, we don't brag about ourselves, or the opposite people, or our opposites are the ones that talk for us. The way they said it, yeah, I let them talk. I let them talk for me, which means I let the people say what I'm doing, how I'm. Like if you're working, you're doing good work. You don't talk about that. You let the opposites talk about that for you. Like I said, we don't want, or like Cecilia Kuhn said, she said, Tlingit people were modest people. We don't talk about ourselves. So we let the opposites do that. And the only time we do talk, again, like I said, is about ourselves is at the payoff party when we put up money for it.
So, Paul,
Yeah.
so that's been a question because in more recent times, you know, one of the first things we teach a lot of the learners that, you know, think at Yukatungi is
Mhm.
to introduce themselves, and
Mhm.
and yet, you know, we never really had to introduce ourselves. People
Mhm.
knew who we were or by our
Yeah.
clothing, and and so the conflict really is this humility, you know,
Mhm.
thing, and introducing ourselves, and
Mhm.
particularly when we, I guess, have to figure out appropriately, you know,
Mhm.
those really long introductions versus
Mhm.
the, you know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
do you have advice about that for folks?
Yeah. So I know I understand that, and I feel the same confliction too. It's really hard to navigate. I get hard to navigate what's when you're talking about yourself or introducing yourself. Um, Even now, I still have trouble. When people ask me to introduce myself, I don't like doing that. I really don't like talking about myself, so I'll ask somebody else to do it. Uh, Most times, if I can, especially if I'm in a cultural setting or not in a cultural setting, but if I know somebody's there that can do it for me, then I'll ask that. I'd rather not. Um, that's what I do, but every situation is different.
Yeah.
So when um when we're in functions, I guess like when it's within our own people, try and keep it short. And as we get into more other ones that are maybe we're outside of Southeast somewhere, then we can explain a little bit more about who we are. But even then, that's for me, yes, that's what I would say. Um,
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I also appreciate, I was in one language learning class, and the instructor spent the time teaching the, you know, the group how to introduce each other, and
uh-huh.
started there rather than introducing yourself. Didn't teach you how to
Yeah.
introduce yourself. They taught you how to introduce your Kune, or you know.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
thank you. Goodness, geez.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So my brother also teaches with that method. He doesn't teach introducing yourself. Rather than doing that, he developed curriculum so you introduce somebody else, and you can do it that way so the people know. And so that's one way of doing it. And then you learn more of the verbs because, like I said, Tlingit is a very verb-based language. So that's what he focused on was the verbs of the introduction. And I'm not sure where that one went, where that curriculum went, but I can ask him. But that's his curriculum that he used, and he does that with the kids in summer camp, which is really good because then you're taking the focus off yourself and you're speaking for someone else. And so that's I feel that was very good. So there's that way as well, and then there's also the ways that we're taught. Yuchat Tuasag, where you're at the house you're from. Yeah, I'll try and get a hold of my brother to see if I can get that curriculum sent to me so I can see if I can use it, get his permission to use it, which would be good for everyone, I believe. And so that's good. Let's see. And oftentimes after we get done responding with how we're feeling, however you're feeling, um, I remember a few years ago, my dad ran into an elder and they were out talking and Tlingit to each other and they asked each other how they were doing. And the elder that my dad was talking to looked at him and he said, "Oh, Paul, I feel alive. I can feel all my aches and pains." And they just started laughing with each other. So even in our people always find humor in something. That's one thing about people is we're good at laughing and playing jokes on ourselves. Telling on ourselves. That's usually what we do. So we tell jokes on ourselves. So those are a few ways of saying or responding with how somebody's doing. And if you're talking to a group, it changes. So I said wasa'iyati for how are you. If I were to ask everyone, I'd say wasa'iyati. Wasa'iyati. Yi is plural. Slight difference, real slight difference is you're just adding a Y. Wasa'iyati. How are all of you? And if you want to make it add another word to it, you could say the cut yuhan. The cut means all of something. Yuhan is all of you. How are all of you? The cut yuan. So remember, I said you could. Sometimes our elders would change this depending on the speaker. So most times I'll say yuhan. Some people will say the cut yuan. I'm trying to figure out I'm trying to go back in my memory how they said it. It'll come back to me. Achkaudiha. Um, so that's one way, another way of asking how are all of you, you all. And then usually the one that is responding or the person that's asking, they can also ask how your father is, your mother, your dad, wasayati. So instead of saying iyati, it just refers to wasayati ish. How is your dad? Wasayati itla. Just how is your dad? How is your mom? Those types of things when you're talking to each other. And they say, oh, he or she is okay. He or she is good. So huh means him or her in that context. So if we're talking about my dad, I don't have to say I don't have to say my dad is okay. We're already talking about. Let's say we're already talking about my dad. I could say oh, my dad is okay. I didn't reference my dad or talk about my dad, but because we're already talking about him, I don't have to say ish. I can just say huh, which is referring to anybody you're talking about, he or she. So my dad is fine. He's okay. He's good. We're talking about my dad, so I don't need to say ish. I could just say huh. And that can mean him or her, whoever you're talking about in that context, in that conversation. Let's see. I'm trying to think back in my memory of some other ones. And when you respond to saying my dad's okay, then the other person that you're talking to could just say yik eh. Oh, that's good. Like saying that's good news. Yik eh, yik eh. Any questions?
Maybe we could practice saying some of those sentences, that phrases that you just gave,
Okay.
and I can, or so maybe somebody else can try and
Mhm.
type some of them in.
Okay. Oh, here's another one. Another one that my great grandmother Alice Johnny. She was my great grandmother's youngest sister, youngest sister, I believe, if I remember right. I remember running into her at Fred Meyer's when she was still alive. She was. I asked her in Clinket. I asked her, "Wasi iti How are you, Grandma?" She said, "Oh, I'm okay. I'm good. I'm good." She would respond to me in English, even though I would talk to her in Tlingit. I knew she understood. That's why I would talk to her. And let's see, she said, "I say I feel good even when I don't feel good because it helps me feel better." So that's another cultural thing too, I guess. Even when we're feeling bad, sometimes we'll say, "I'm feeling good," just because we're trying to call those good feelings. We're trying to, I don't know, I guess psychologically psych ourselves out into feeling that we're good. Because I remember she said she was in almost 90 when she was still walking every day. Sometimes I'd see her run across the street around Walmart. I'd see her run across the street real quick, and she was still in her late 80s when she did that. And she told me, she said, sometimes I feel like just wanting to crawl underneath um, those clothes racks under the ones that are circular shaped. She's pointed to one. She said, sometimes I just want to crawl under that and just fall asleep. But I tell people I'm good because it makes me feel better. So that's something she said. So back to practicing. Waseiyati. Waseiyati ish. How is your father? Wasayati ish. Wasayati ish. And then I'll add the response. Helwasa ute hukua. Helwasa ute hukua. He's good. He's doing good. Or there's nothing wrong. In that reference, it's trying to say he's nothing. There's nothing wrong. He's doing good. Wasaiyati, how are you? Wasaiyati, wasaiyati, how are you? So here's kind of a way to recognize where speakers are from, is just by the way they say tleth or heth. I noticed most speakers from up this way in the junior area will say tleth, tleth, tlethwasa, or tleth. They all mean the same thing. It's just a different twist to it. When I was in Cake, I always heard them say heth, or you can say heith. I heard one speaker from Yakutat say huth. So it's just dialect difference, but they all mean the same thing. I say hethwasa. If you read the books, most times they'll say tleth. So it can mean I'm okay, or I'm good, kind of. Shirley Kendall was the one that told me that Hethwasa means nothing's wrong. Nothing's wrong is how she translated it. So those are some of the meanings, help you understand a little more about the response. The other one we said was yik. So if, well, when I respond to asking how my father is, and the other person says I say he's all right. The person asking would say yik. That's good. That's good. So the way somebody says the word can tell you how good they actually are. The way you say the word can mean a lot to a speaker. So I remember the other day too, we worked on the pinch K sound. So yik is a good one to practice. To make that pinched K sound, remember you're just holding your breath for a quick second. So the best way I explain it is just to, I can explain it as like you're saying just a regular K, like in English, you say k, k, k. Now to say the pinched K, hold your breath and practice saying it. K, k, k. That's how you make the sound. Yik, yik, yik. Any other questions so far? back at my notes. Okay. So we talked about the weather too. Kote was the word for weather. Kote. And we talked a little bit about how the way you say a word or can depend on how the weather was either the day before or after. So if I were to answer this question before we go on to the weather, or we can save the weather for the next class. So somebody asked me, Wasa iyati, and I responded, Hetwasa wa eqa'a. How about yourself? Is what you're asking. What is you're asking the person who asked you, what or what both mean the same thing, just again dialect difference. What qa'a. Qa'a is and you is kind of for short. And yourself, how about you, is what you're asking. And you can respond with however you're feeling. And when they reply, I usually respond with yake. Oh, that's good. That's good. However they're feeling. Or sometimes they really don't feel very good. And you would just say, Ishan, poor thing, you know. So again, however you feel, like it can also be a teasing term too. But if you really feel bad for them, it'll come out in the way you say it. Any other questions about asking how somebody's doing? Wasa'iyati. And that's just physical emphasis, like how are you physically? Wasa'iyati or wasas'iyati. Wa'eqa'a. 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 So this K sound is the underlined one. Qa'a. So qa'a can mean and or however, depending on how you use it. And this one means and yourself. Wa'eqa'a and yourself, or what about you? Wa'eh. So there's that period between the A and the E. That's there, or even in the if we didn't have it there, it wouldn't flow right. You'd say qua. It don't sound right. So it says that period means it's a quick stop. Wa, eh. It's to differentiate those two sounds. Wa, eh. Ko, and that one, wasa ituati. Wasa ituati. Wasa ituati. Ya kandahite. It's beginning to get to that time. Any questions, comments? I'm here to try to help folks understand, speak more. Just gotta let me know what I can do to help. Okay. Thank you, all of you, the ones that are consistently here. Friday cookie, Klasatin. We'll see you all Friday. Yeah.